Welcome to Surviving Society. Professor Bev Skeggs. Bashment horns, please, George. Now, this is such an important episode for me personally because Bev has been one of the key sources of inspiration for me in my career to date. And to be sat here talking with you about your own career in April 2024, it is such a privilege. It really is.
That's so lovely. But yeah, that's probably why I'm now working on comedy, because when people say anything serious to me like that, I just want to laugh. I can never believe it.
Why do you think that is?
Maybe I never took myself that seriously.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And maybe academia is a very strange world.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. Now I've actually kind of formally retired. I'm still doing quite a lot of stuff, but formally retired. It's like, why did I enter that comic universe?
Yeah.
Of very strange people doing very strange things.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm in a moment of reassessing and understanding the absurdity of it all. And
why did you? If you take, let's roll back to, how old were you when you started your PhD?
Oh, God. I was young. I was 21. So I was very young when I started. And I did it because I didn't want to get a job. I wanted to carry on being a student, really. And there were lots of questions I wanted answering. I wanted to understand things. I was curious. I wanted to understand things, and I wanted to read lots of books that I had. And it wasn't about a career. It wasn't even about a job. It was just about doing that at that point in time.
I remember when we had a conversation, I think it was me, you and Michaela Benson a couple of years ago now, about your career and about looking at your kind of interventions as a feminist, and you sort of talking about being around all these different minds and these different organisers and people and being kind of enthused and inspired by that.
Most definitely, because, I think it was the 80s. We just got Thatcher voted into power. It was quite a shock. All the horrific things that they'd been planning, like the miners' strike, started happening. And it was trying to understand what was going on. So violence increased massively, especially against women in particular. The kind of the places we were living got harder and harder. The people around us, life got worse. And so you could see that. It was like a very early stage, what we now call austerity. It was austerity. It was happening and you could see it. So I was involved in all sorts of things to try and counteract that, and also finding my way around, finding answers or understanding things. Why is this happening? How can this, like now, I still live in a constant state of sheer rage about what's happening to people. And also exasperation. How can they do that? How can they do this to people? I mean, the treatment of disabled people at the moment in Britain is beyond belief.
I think that these are questions, Bev, that I've kind of been asking myself recently, like as a sociologist, but as someone that's really interested in why people make the choices that they make, and thinking about what power does to people, but also thinking about how not understanding ourselves or not understanding our history then means that we reproduce violence. Yeah. And I think like you bring up the example of disabled people, like we can say how can they do this, but they've done it before.
Yeah, I know.
Like European eugenics has been alive and well for a long time. So basically, like one of the things that you've always really inspired me with is that kind of rage. Like how can we need to feel frustrated. We need to channel that frustration into talking about inequality. We need to use that as a tool. But I'm also now thinking, to what extent is my rage going to make a difference? Is there other ways of doing this work?
Well,
Go on.
when you get to, I mean, I did have
go
very, down period. You get to the end of a career.
Yeah.
And it is formalised in the sense that you do retire. And I was really ill. So that kind of was another, a double whammy, really. But then
you're still here.
I am still
looking
here.
as stylish as ever. So fresh. So fresh.
I know, it's amazing I'm still here and I'm making the most of it now.
Good.
But part of it is you think, I've done all that work. I exhausted myself.
Yes.
I hit so many walls doing all the political work, all the writing work, trying to save people, all sorts of things like that. Absolutely exhausted myself. And what difference did it make? And sometimes you look back and think it did make a difference. And you occasionally get emails saying, my God, your work made a difference. Or, you say nice things and it does make you think it did matter. But it's like you're always on the back foot.
Yeah.
So it's how, like you say, eugenics has never stopped. In fact, I think they've got more powerful. Mm-hmm. And I think they've that movement has now, gone mainstream. We see it in the Conservative Party. And so how do we keep that struggle going? I think that's what I find quite hard. I think probably if you're ill, you find it hard because you haven't got the energy. So that makes you kind of rethink about things. But also how you're really angry all the time, which is not good for you. You behave like Victor Meldrew, the British comedian, when you're listening to the radio. I had to stop listening to the news at one point because I was just shouting all the time. Now, I grew up with a dad that shouted at the television and the radio, and we used to get so cross with him because you couldn't watch a programme without him going, you can't say that. And I think I've become him because it's like, you're lying. Those stats are wrong. Where did you get those from? And it's like all the time. So it's like, how do you keep the hope going along with the rage? Because you are fighting on so many fronts.
Like, I think one of the things that I've kind of come to terms with recently, and I'm really grateful for lots of feminists that we've had on this show in particular that have helped me with this, particularly the series we did, or as Chibo led, on the role of love in social justice work. It's not enough to be right.
Yeah.
It's actually not enough. It's not enough to have the empirical data. It's not enough to have the facts. It's not enough. It's just not enough.
No, it's not. And that's why I think I still insist on thinking about caring.
Yeah.
Because the people who have power, who are putting all these policies into effect, they just don't care. They really, really do not care. They will let you die. They will, I've had so many incidents of that now in my life. My parents, they let them die. Me, I could have died if I couldn't have paid my way out of it, which really upset me. It's like they just let people who are vulnerable occasionally, just let them die.
Bev, what's so crazy about this? I'm gonna take us on a turn in this episode, right? And then I'm gonna bring us back to one of the reasons why we're doing it is because of the launch of Bev's archive. But you see the people you talked about, the people that have the power to enact these policies of life and death. Why don't they care?
I think they've been brought up to only think about themselves and maybe their close family. Yeah. To think about their own self-interest, to be competitive. I think that's absolutely key. I think we've lost the analysis of how competitiveness invades our lives. And also how they've learnt to not hate necessarily, but just despise or just not be bothered about other people. You hear them speak about other people and you just think, wow, how, as you say, how did you get to that? But I think there's a particular arrogance, a confidence, a competitiveness. They're in their own circles. They don't meet with people, and it's, that's what they are. Narcissistic, self-interested individuals.
And you know what? It's so interesting. Like, for me personally, like looking at the characteristics of those individuals, and you mentioned at the beginning, reflecting on kind of academia and like academics, like who gets brought into these institutions, like how we're all a bit odd, etc. And one of the things that I'm trying to look at myself, and I do think this is going to get a bit sociological. I think this is about me trying to make sense of the tensions between structure and agency, but on a kind of a spiritual level, I'm looking at those people you're describing, the competitiveness, the arrogance, the wealth, the greed, and I'm like, what is it on the quote unquote left that is within them that is also within us? And like is denying that we are completely different from those people. And I knew Bev's face. I know it's hard and it's tension, but I think that I'm trying to think of different ways of looking at this tension between structure and agency. How does an agent become an enactment of harm at the state? Like, how do they do that? And I think that there are things about them that we're uncomfortable about that we have in ourselves as well. And I'm not saying that you and I would condone
deep psychoanalysis.
Yeah, no, and I don't. But like, obviously, like, you know, I'm a feminist sociologist, but like, it's just not enough. So what else is there? What else can we see? How do we?
I think you've got to appeal to the very small parts of them that still have some form of humanity or some form of care for other people. So to take an example, the woman who lived next door to my mum when she was ill, she was 95. And I used to call her my surrogate mum because she was like this feisty, clearly was a lesbian, but wouldn't admit it because her generation. Very feisty woman who had been a midwife. And you can imagine that kind of the typical character. And she was so kind to me and to my mum. I mean, she was amazing. And then she voted for Brexit. She was racist. And then it transpired that her family had owned plantations on, is it St. Nevis?
Okay, yeah.
And she used to talk about what great holidays she had there. I'd be sitting in a room going, I don't know how to deal with this. But I thought if we can appeal, there's a good part of her. There's a really caring good part of her. And just try and keep making the connections. But at the age of 95, it was a bit late, I think.
But that is the work, isn't it, Bev? That's what I think it is. And I think that I've spent a lot of time on this podcast saying that I'm above doing that, or that I don't have the space to do that, or that I don't see the value in that. And there is a good and evil, and like there's wrong and right. And again, I'm not trying to condone austerity or anything like that, but how do we bring people with us? And there's lots of critiques, obviously, amongst sociologists about notions of changing hearts and minds. But what else is there then?
Well, I think one of my big campaigns that I've always been concerned with is to block the pathologising of things.
Yeah, say more.
So that's probably why I'm working with Joe Littler at the moment on comedy, because the way working class black people, white people, all working class people get pathologised in very different ways, very, very different ways. Needs to be resisted.
Yes.
It needs to be absolutely challenged, because there was some very good work in the 1970s by somebody called Charles Husband, I think it was, and it was about how the most racist people are those who don't actually know any black people. Actually, they've never come across them. So therefore, all the representations, all the pathology can be believed, it can be built up. Now, I know it doesn't work, logically as a complete argument, but I think it's really key that when people don't know other people, you actually have to give them much better representations of how people are. But there's no interest in doing that, because the long history of pathologising, in particular, black and white working class women through sex work, for instance. They were dangerous, they were contagious, they were going to destroy the family, destroy society. So it's a long, long, long campaign. But I was amazed recently when somebody said to me, "Oh, you're working class, but you're not scary." And I thought, what? Scary? as if I'm going to attack her. And I thought, that's so weird. And I think because there's been so less contact between the working class and middle classes, or it's that very small narcissism of difference where you get the kind of, I'd say, the lower middle classes doing all the social work stuff and coming into contact with some really, really difficult situations. It's when you get those kind of relationships that people start learning and changing and knowing how to understand things. But there's very little of that. There's a great study by a criminologist called David Garland where he looks at how fear was generated by middle-class divorced white couples because they had to get their children from one part of London to another. And they thought the fear was in the working class, getting them through working class areas. And you think, my God, if that has got to that level, how do we challenge that? So for me, it's really important to keep challenging that pathology.
I think that's so powerful, Bev, and thank you so much for engaging in my kind of interpersonal negotiations of how we talk about and think about inequality or how we transcend it.
At the moment, we're looking at Alma's Not Normal, one of my favourite comedy programmes, and Rain Dogs, one of the most difficult and tragic programmes, and Chewing Gum, which is like a light-hearted, beautiful comedy programme. And thinking about how they all basically say we're human, and they're really sociological because they give everything a context, a social context, and they say this is how we grew up. You know, in Chewing Gum, it's the influence of completely bizarre religion.
Yeah.
I mean, crazy.
I'm living
stuff.
on the council estate.
Yeah, exactly. But it's all bright, and it's all funny, and it's all warm. And Alma is all bright and funny and warm in Bolton. No, you know, a horrifically difficult life, but. And Costello in Rain Dogs, based on Cash Carraway's book Skin to State. And that's real comedy tragedy. That's very dark. It's quite different in a sense, but still very funny in places.
Bev, have you watched Baby Reindeer?
Yes.
Oh my. Right. So this is where I'm at.
Good.
This is where I'm at, right?
Yeah.
How harm, abuse, trauma is structured, and how that analysis of structure is not enough to get to the root. And in order to get to the root, we have to look at how when we experience harm or trauma, we then are susceptible to perpetuating it as well. So like going beyond victim, recognizing our victimization, but actually seeing what those experiences then do to our engagements with other people.
Now, I had a friend, a sociologist, Sally Westwood, who used to say to me, she'd been through horrific traumas in various different ways. And she used to say to me, everybody has a trauma.
Yes.
We learn to get over it. Yes. And I think that's quite interesting. And I think we do have traumas and we work them out. And most people will have, not most people, a lot of people we know will have experienced a hell of a lot of violence in their lives in very different ways. And these programmes work through that. Yes. But I think we have to do it sociologically because there's the argument that Lauren Berlant makes about the word trauma. And so every time I hear it, I hear Lauren in my head going, yes, it became one of the greatest seductive ideologies for middle-class America to claim injustice against working-class America. So even though the working class, and especially in the States, the black working class, are experiencing the most horrific conditions. Absolutely. Because the everyday violence is trauma.
Yes.
But it got turned into very individualistic trauma. So I think she was talking about when politicians talked about their traumatic individual experiences. And she was saying, well, what about the collective experiences that people have? And I think that's what we've got to do with it because so many people have experienced, and it's becoming more and more obvious, so many people have experienced abuse. So, that's how power works. Power works on people, against people, and we've got to recognise how that's going on. I think we need loads more conversations about violence, actually.
Yeah.
And it's sociological. You know, lots of people have experienced traumas. We're never going to know how one individual's trauma is going to manifest. You know, you may have been abused, but it'll manifest in very different ways. But we've got to look at what happens when whole groups of people have experienced that trauma. We've got to look at sexual abuse.
Yeah.
We've got to look at, I mean, so much child abuse.
Like,
It's
so much.
extraordinary.
And it's like, for me, like, looking at kind of the sociology of, like, families and relationships in particular, it's the silences around those.
Definitely.
And it's the silences around those. If that silence manifests, then what does that produce in all of our other relationships? Yeah. And I kind of come full circle here to, we were talking about earlier, like the people that enact the policies, the legislation. I'm not making excuses for them, but I often wonder, like, how much of that is related to people's sense of self, their worth, how they're positioned in society.
Well, they learn to become hard.
Yeah.
You know, think about all the, we know, we've read, we've seen all the abuse they experience.
Yeah.
You know, they've been raped probably quite a lot at public schools.
Yeah.
We need to deal with the fact that people who've become really hardened because they've had to deal with that, then go out and behave really, really, really badly. We know these are structural forms.
Yeah.
Male rape in public school is a structural form of violence.
Yes.
We know that. Female rape in the world.
Yeah.
The number of women that get killed every week through domestic violence. These are structural forms of violence. We need to understand that. And, well, we need to speak about it. We do understand it. We do know a lot about it.
And I guess my thing now is, how do we speak about it in a way that can be transformative, in a way that doesn't create ideas of like good and evil, wrong and right, even though like social justice and sociology needs to be at the heart of it.
I know what you're trying to say, but I want to kind of push back a bit.
Yeah, go on, please do.
I think people don't, these things really need talking about. They need a public forum. They need not to be spoken in the discourse of the victim.
Yes.
That is absolutely key. And one thing that's always struck me is how middle class people claim and love being victims.
That's it, and this is it, and that's why I think Baby Reindeer is really good, because it goes beyond that.
Yeah. Because he won't accept it. But then there's also shame. In that. And Valerie Walker Dean's great work on shame.
Oh yeah.
Is that people don't want to talk about these things. You know, how many years does it take you to process and actually even mention the things you've been through, you know? Because it's shameful. And often you won't tell people because you think they'll use it against you, and you think, wow, that's how bad it can be. So I want to kind of keep pulling it back sociologically and say it's about the individualising of it. The silencing is about the individualising of it, and we need to shift the discourse to how this is about social shame and how that happens. And try not to focus necessarily. I mean, you know, the group of people who are enacting these horrific policies in government, which are cruel, asylum seekers, shit, cruelty. Disabled people, cruelty. Mothers, cruelty. I mean, it's just cruel. You know, choosing between eating or heating. That's fucking cruel. I'm sorry. It's like cruel. So these are a big group of people passing laws. They're not just individuals. They are all agreeing to this. And we need to think, what position do they have to be able to do this? And so I want to really, really put it into a wider discourse about how, or a wider understanding of the positions they inhabit. And I do think they don't care, but how have they been so brutalised? We know, but what do we do to change that?
Yeah.
You know? Change public schools.
Abolish them, maybe.
What a good idea.
This kind of brings me back to the reason for doing this podcast, Bev, is because my incredible stepdaughters have been working with you on producing your archive and website, putting all your work into one place. And there's so many different narratives and anecdotal reflections on the website, which I love, which you can just hear you speaking through them. And there's a particular section where you talk about like becoming a head of department in different institutions, and like how like working class women become the kind of the defence against neoliberalism, and what that was like. And what I've read so far of the website, Bev, is that you've worked really, really hard, and it's been challenging at times. That's what I read. That's what I could read. That it's been challenging or felt challenging.
Well,
for
I
you.
have to say, your stepdaughters, Evelyn and Becky. I mean, Becky came in at the end, but Evelyn was really pushing me to actually make me do things.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And then it was quite therapeutic in the sense that I wrote stuff, and I had to take loads out because I thought, oh God, it could be libelous, because there is so much bad behaviour in the head of department. You've got to be... I mean, that TV programme, have you seen it, called The Chair?
Oh yeah, that's so good, isn't it? Good. It's so accurate. Of Sandra Oh.
Yeah,
so it's a fictionalized elite institution in the States, talking about academia. Basically, it's so accurate. Yeah. You've got anti-Semitism, anti-black racism. You've got sexual assault. You've got grooming.
Yeah, the entitled professor. Won't do anything.
Academia 101.
Yeah, and I felt it was like that. There was a moment when Helen Wood and I wanted to write something like that, because the experiences, she'd been head of department at De Montfort, Leicester, and the experiences are bizarre. They really, really are bizarre. Some of the things that happen and the way that people attribute power to you when you're trying to defend things. And so, let me say, I never, ever wanted to be a head of department.
So why did you do it?
Well, I did Director of Women's Studies the first time because I was the only Women's Studies full-time employee. And we wanted to shape what was happening. And we thought it would be more collective. No, I did it with Celia Lurie. We did it collectively. And so that was actually probably the hardest. And some very bizarre situations emerged there. And then at Manchester, because I got ambushed into it, which was...
Ambushed into it?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a person who wanted to do it. And a certain group of men told her that I was going to do it before they told me I was going to do it. And then they worked on me for about 6 or 7 weeks to persuade me to do it. Because they thought, this is how they did it, they thought I would defend the department because we were going to go into a big merge and all that kind of stuff. Now, what was really interesting, I did defend the department, but not in the way they wanted. So they behaved so badly towards me. It was fascinating, the classic one for all academics out there. The classic one is when somebody tells you a meeting's been changed and it's a crucial meeting where big decisions will be made. Check it, because they'd say this meeting's been changed. They get somebody else to phone up and say the meeting's been changed, one of the administrators, and you go, oh, okay, right, I don't have to go to that. And actually the meeting hadn't been changed. They just didn't want you in the room. So the dirty tactics that are played in universities are extraordinary.
But it reminds me of the people that we've been talking about so far on this episode. Like, this is...
Yep, people who don't care.
Institutions, like, what do institutions, quote unquote, make people do, or what do they... What do they bring out in us?
They do. Institutions do make us do things. They are performative.
Yeah.
They make us, we have to behave in particular ways. So I remember being told at Goldsmiths, interestingly, a long while ago, that we had to make 40%, reduce the budget by 40% in the department, and that would at that time meant losing 11 members of staff. And so they gave us the job as head of department to come up with who we'd lose. Can you imagine doing that to your colleagues?
How was that?
Well, obviously, lots of sleepless nights, lots of pain. Then I just said, I can't do it.
Yeah.
But then you know that if you say you can't do it, they find somebody who will do it.
Yeah.
This is part of the problem with academia. They've always got somebody who won't defend. They've always got people who will kowtow to the most horrific neoliberal impositions. And I stood against quite a lot at Manchester, got into a lot of trouble, and I was called a troublemaker, but I don't, that's what you do. And you have to defend certain things. So when people say you've got to do, now everybody just does them, like PDRs and things like that.
What's a PDR?
Performance.
Oh, performance review.
Yeah.
Performance development review.
Well, they call it development, but, it's a bloody joke. It's just used to control you, punish you, and in a Foucauldian style way, totally discipline you.
But even as you're speaking, Bev, it's just making me think of government.
Well, yeah.
That's what it's making me think of. And I guess part of my quandary, reflections, provocations, reasonings about academia is, and particularly social sciences, with people that maybe are quote unquote on our side, or institutions that are quote unquote on our side, it's the pretending that I'm struggling with, I think.
Yep. But it is, I think what I learned, it took me a hell of a long time to learn this, because I think I believed, I'd always thought if you had positions of power, you would use them to do good things.
That's exactly what I thought.
So, you go into women's studies, you, again, wear yourself out doing it, and fight to get a room, and you do that so that the students can use the room and all come together and have great conversations and work together and things like that. So you do that, and you have power for a reason. I learned that people want power just so they can have power. They kind of love it. And I could never get my head around that. I still can't. They just want to control things and control people. Now that is really, really odd. And that would take more.
But I think, Bev, I don't think it's odd. I think it is society. And I think just rolling into some of your work, which has probably inspired me the most, capitalism. This is what capitalism creates.
But it shouldn't.
But it does.
Academia,
it does. Like, there's money to be made in the control of people and ideas. There's money to be made in harmful practices. Like, I think a lot of what we're talking about here is the kind of the intimate social relations of capitalism. And like, it's not that I think that that's the only answer, but for me, it's the one of the answer that's given me the most kind of solace in that, okay, people are treating X group of people in this way because there's money to be made in doing that. There's money to be made in cutting corners. There's money to be made in taking away benefits. There's money to be made in cutting staff. There's money to be made in perpetuating hate as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, God, yeah. Like the gossip rumour is quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I'm not surprised because academics are the most competitive people. I used to talk to my friend who I met where I lived, and she worked for Goldman Sachs, who were meant to be, the evil masters of the universe. And we used to share stories of what was happening. Yeah. And she was like, oh, my God, you make my workplace look like a nursery.
Academia's gangster. I say it to everyone, right? It's gangster. It's gangster,
well, there's a brutality to it. And some of the worst behaviour I've ever seen is, and this is what makes me laugh when you get the government. This is why, again, I'm a bit resistant. The government is saying, universities are hotbeds of radical thinking.
Which one?
If only.
Yeah.
No, they're all trying to, do each other in over research grants and get the money off other people by lying. I mean, the number of times people lie about what they do and how it's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So of course it's about capitalism. And I think, loads of academics just didn't know what was hitting them. I remember having an argument with really, really close friends when they introduced tuition fees. And of course, I was going nuts. I was going absolutely mad. This is outrageous. This is the beginning of the privatisation of higher education. We have to stop this. And she was like, it's not privatisation. That's not privatisation. I was like,
yes, it is.
What is it then? And I think a lot of academics just kind of don't. I mean, this is one of my big beefs. They don't understand that their work is a job, and as a job they are an employee and they have certain conditions of service, and that they don't have to enact all these horrific neoliberal policies. It's astonishing to watch some people when they become heads of departments. In fact, they become more feudal. I've seen more feudal heads of department who gift. They gift and they patronise, as in become a patron. They do patronise as well. But they gift people and they sponsor certain people. Now, I want to remember doing a seminar, and we had 27 different international groups represented. And they all talked about their different systems, so Italy and Germany. And you have to have a patron. You have to get somebody, at a very early stage to get you through the system. And I think we've got quite a few heads of departments who work like that. No accountability of any kind. So it's that I actually still don't understand. I can understand when people want other people's research grants money and they nobble them and do all that kind of stuff. I can understand that because that's, greed and competition. That is purely capitalist. But I cannot understand why they just want power for power. So it's not always just about the money.
Do you think, and coming on to another important, well, for me personally, important section of your work, do you think this is about value? Who is considered to be of value? What is valued? How we can acquire value through capital? People wanting to have a particular status in order to feel valued.
Yeah, definitely.
And we've been talking about academia and government here, but I think that this cuts into all walks of the professional life. And if we're not feeling a value in ourselves because of the structures of society that put us in a particular position, then of course we're going to try and acquire it through different...
Yeah, definitely. And I think that status does become very important and is a measure of value. I remember when I was happily teaching away at Worcester College of Higher Education, fantastic students, great atmosphere, really, 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 really good. And somebody said to me, why are you teaching there? That's a second-rate institution. And I was like, what? And then I heard it about 4 or 5 times. And I thought, oh, is it? And you hear it and you think, oh, God, loaded with a complete lack of value when you enter because of who you are. You suddenly think, oh, God, I've gone into the wrong place. I've done the wrong thing because you don't know. I didn't know, about Oxford and Cambridge, but I'd never want to go there.
No.
But you don't know about this kind of, and it was one of the best learning teaching environments I've ever worked in. And I left because to go to a job where I was seriously sexually harassed, I'd say, and bullied. So it's like, oh my God, why did I do that?
Yeah.
Because I felt very underrated. No, not underrated in the place, undervalued. Yes. I felt like I hadn't got it right.
Yeah.
And I needed to know how to get it right. So I think that's part of it. But I also think the other thing I've seen, and I won't name the institution, but where mediocrity, it absolutely. Because I think people know when they're not.
We can't say it. We can't say it. Sorry, Bev.
Yeah.
Really well. When you're speaking about your lived experience of teaching and trying to work out what is the value or what is the quote unquote right thing to do, a quote in my head is coming to me from one of your papers about value, and it's something that I've used in a couple of papers recently. It's what is proper who is proper and what is the proper thing to do.
Yeah, yeah. And I think when I was younger, I didn't know. You know, I enter a university and it's full of people that are almost alien to me. So I can understand how, if you're not used to knowing people and things, it does make a big difference. And I think I spent some time wanting to be accepted as proper. And then I think I got into, oh, fuck you. You know, it's like, I can't be. You're never, ever going to accept me. You're never going to take me seriously. You're never going to rate me as much. And still, I remember a very famous feminist saying to me, I can't believe you've got so far in your career. You have so many ideas, but, you know, you don't really know how to articulate them. And then another famous feminist telling me that I didn't speak grammatically. And this was when I was at Goldsmiths as a professor. I was like, what? So you're never going to be proper. And that's what I've learned. That's why I love Alma. You're never going to be normal. You're never going to be... But other people may think you've got power, so you must be. But no, you get those put-downs all the time. They never stop. It's quite incredible.
And I guess it's for us as individuals trying to think about social justice in a more collective way. We have to be able to pour into ourselves and understand ourselves and what we do as valuable, because we're not going to get that kind of outside validation. But then also recognising that not getting that outside validation, it does affect you. It affects your confidence, affects your self-esteem. And that's what I feel like we also have a kind of proliferation of within the academy as well. Like
but
a lot
you find your friends.
Yeah, you do. You have to find your community.
Allies
yeah.
and your friends, and you say, you won't believe.
Yeah.
You know, going back to that kind of, you won't believe what they said to me. You know, look at them. They've written 2 articles in 10 years. Who the fuck are they to say that to me? And they do. They say it. And this is what also astonishes me. They say it without any awareness, no reflexivity, no contrition. They just think they are entitled. They are really clever. And actually... You know, hello, mirror.
It's about power, isn't it?
Yeah. And insecurity.
Exactly. I was going to say that projection.
Yeah. And I think insecurity underlines most of it. Now, we are insecure, right? I was very insecure. But I learned that I am. So what?
What can I do? What next?
Get over it.
Yeah.
I am. Yeah. It's just like, get over that insecurity. You are. Obviously it comes up, and at times you just think you're shit, and you know that you just live with it.
It's just witnessing yourself in the moment, I think, and it's like, oh, I'm feeling something in my body now. That's the insecure part of me.
Yeah. Try
to be aware of it. So however you respond to that said person isn't kind of giving away your power.
Yeah. And you know, I think it's when I was doing the research on value struggles, you know, one of the really important comments was, well, who's judging you? You know, if you take the person who's judging you really seriously and you respect them and you like their work, fine, take that criticism. And I do. But if they're just like, you know, some mediocre nobody who's really entitled and wants to pick on something that's not even that significant, well, you know, they need to get over themselves, not me.
Exactly. Bev, what has been your favourite project to work on?
Oh.
Or your top 3 projects to work on?
Well, obviously formations, but that was quite traumatic in that non-individualistic sense of doing a PhD, because I didn't really know what I was doing. But the women were amazing. And yeah, I could still go back and I could still do more. And I learned so much from them. I think that's the other thing. I'm talking about the horror of academia. Your research, the people you do research with are amazing usually because you're learning.
Yeah.
Your students, I just taught a course at Lancaster. The students were incredible. The first year students, the MA students. I mean, you know.
That's what we do it for, isn't it?
Yeah. And you just you kind of see them learn and they bring stuff to you, and they sometimes know lots more about things than on a particular topic. You bring the topic and they bring all sorts of things. They're great. So we're kind of, learning about things from other people. So formations, I love the reality TV one, even though I hated it.
I love the reality TV one.
I hated having to watch all the programmes because it just makes you so angry. And Helen and I argued a lot because we had different... she'd say it's the narrative. She's really good at media, like, understanding the political economy, the forms media takes, the narrative, the mise en scène, the characteristics. She did all that. And I go, it's a social relationship. So we used to but it was a really productive, really wonderful way.
And it was Big Brother you worked on as well,
No,
wasn't
it was we're all the transformation programs. Yeah, the ones that really, really pathologise the working class. But they are funny because like Trini and Susanna.
Oh right, yeah. And did you are what you eat? Did you do that one as well?
We did some on You Are What You Eat.
Yeah.
We did, I can't remember, we did loads of programmes because we had to go through and understand them textually to begin with. And then we did lots of research with the participants, and that was fascinating. So, that was really good. And then I loved doing the software project because I knew nothing and I learnt so much. The project, it began to try and look at how social media affected people's relationships, and it really ended as a study of how monopolies have formed, capitalism works, and how everybody's lives now just become a source of extraction.
And what year was that again, that project?
That began in 2013, was it?
Wow, and look, 2024 where we're at now. Data.
Well, nobody would believe us.
And now look.
We kept saying, because we were, Simon Yule had designed the software that actually, and people gave us permission to put the software so we could see what, on their browsers, so we could see what companies were doing when they were putting adverts on and things like that. So it was quite revolutionary software at that stage. And we kept saying, what? They're on everything. They know everything you're doing. And I remember phoning up one of our participants, was a gay man that I knew. And I said, you signed a consent form, but I didn't realise that we can see every single site that you're on.
Yeah.
Do you want me to, I think we need to renegotiate consent.
Yeah.
Because you may not want me to know that you are on all these gay porn sites.
Yeah.
Effectively. And he was like, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But we didn't think they were doing, or they told us they weren't doing this. We felt as researchers, we were really intruding on people because we'd got everything they were on. And then we tried to, some people said, oh, well, I've designed blockers so they can't be on mine. And we were like, here, look.
They're on it.
Yeah. And that was a long while ago.
And look now, they're on everything.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, there's nothing they cannot get. But yeah, again, it was, nobody believed us. When we did the reality TV one, that turned into Google Box.
Gogglebox.
Google Box. And then there was another great project, the one on Manchester's gay village.
Oh yeah,
about sexuality in space.
Yeah.
So when we did that was really funny because we were going round the village with questionnaires. That was quite all designed to be used in pubs, so that we could get to people. And then a film crew were going round, and they were almost getting exactly the same quotes as we were getting, and they made Queer as Folk.
Oh yes. Oh my God.
So that was really fun. Some of the dialogue in Queer as Folk is exactly the same as our dialogue.
Wow. And then I guess for our international audience, I remember when you started to turn to more global inequalities of race and class. And how was that for you, sort of taking that global leap?
I loved it.
Yeah.
I felt I should have done it much earlier.
Yeah.
It was, I think because I'd done the software one, the reality TV one felt very provincial.
Yeah.
But then I'd go around the world and it was great because people would give me examples, how Finnish reality TV was about what people had in their cupboards. Swedish reality TV, as you can imagine, was mainly about sex. But there were some amazing ones in Latin America where it was really all about class and race. So it made me think I needed to do a lot more about that. The Middle Eastern ones were amazing too. So, it's kind of like I felt I needed to switch. But then I got absorbed in software and just learning to understand how things worked and reading all the stuff. And then I thought I really need to, I need to think bigger. But because a lot of the processes are exactly the same, it's like colonialism manifests in very similar ways, in different ways, in very similar forms. The processes are the same. It's about extraction, it's about property, and it's about abuse and labour. So you can kind of see, and that's, I think I was writing a project that explored how that worked through class and race, but then I retired, so I haven't carried on with that because I wanted to do a 5-country study of that. But yeah.
If you were going to give advice to any up-and-coming sociologists, what would you say?
Keep with your own integrity. Don't just do what you're told to do.
Yeah.
Stay with your politics. Learn about your politics. Stay with your principles. It's hard. It's really, really hard. But I'd also say pick your battles, because you can't fight on every front. And when people say, why aren't you doing that when you've been doing the other? Just say, because I'm bloody worn out doing the other. So I think, you can't fight everything at once. You crack your head too much. So, and keep hope. And the most important advice, actually, is make sure you've got allies. I made a big mistake once of taking a job where I had no allies and, couldn't do anything.
No.
So you need allies all the time, and you need your friendship networks to support you, and you need that to be outside of academia so that you can see how funny it is when they go, you did what?
The future of feminism. And you know what I'm thinking here? The things I'm thinking about here.
A big one, eh?
The things I'm thinking about here are obviously in relation to colonial legacies of extraction, exploitation, abuse that you've mentioned, race and class, transphobia, the political economies of harm and abuse towards women and other genders. What is the future of feminism now? I
think there will always be feminism.
Yeah.
There's that very basic quote, women do not want to be treated as doormats, but it's not just women, I know. I think whenever you've got abusive patriarchal power, there will always be resistance to it. The forms it takes will be different. And I just wish there wasn't so much infighting. But I can understand why there is, because of investments in different positions.
Yeah.
And I would like it to happen in a non-moral register or high ground where people say, I am right. Because, you can be right in one moment, not in another. Just listen, learn. Divide and conquer is the politics of the powerful. We need to learn solidarity. But I know why we don't, so it's really hard.
Yeah.
Stick with it.
Bev, final thoughts?
Final thoughts? Well, if you're going to become a head of department, read Machiavelli. Yeah, most definitely. Also Melanie Klein, maybe, and wonder why every bad thing's being projected onto you as the bad object. Final thoughts? Yeah, don't take yourself seriously.
Boom. Mic drop. Don't take yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
Bev.
Is that all right?
You are an absolute legend. I'm so grateful.
So fun.
I'm so grateful that You were brought into my life and brought into this world. You're incredible.
Well, you too.
You're incredible.
You too. And I'm glad I'm still here.
And me. I'm really glad you're still here. Thank you, listeners. That was Professor Bev Skeggs. You can find the link to Bev's archive now in the episode notes. It is live.
Thank you for listening to Surviving Society.
To support our work, you can rate,
review and subscribe to host or produce a series of Surviving Society.
Get in touch with us via Twitter or Instagram.